Before the heartbreak and hospital beds, before the tears and final goodbyes, Patrick Swayze was Hollywood's golden boy. There was a time when just hearing his name made people smile. He was the man who could dance like nobody else, act with quiet depth, and steal a scene with nothing more than a smirk. Whether it was Johnny Castle lifting Baby in Dirty Dancing, or Sam Wheat holding on to love from the afterlife in Ghost, Patrick wasn't just a leading man, he was a cultural phenomenon. But what made Patrick different wasn't just his talent, it was his spirit. He had a rare mix of rugged masculinity and emotional vulnerability that made him relatable to everyone. Guys admired him. Women adored him. And in a town filled with egos, he somehow managed to stay grounded. He didn't chase fame. It came to him. And once it did, he carried it with grace. By the early 90s, Patrick Swayze was everywhere. Magazines called him the sexiest man alive, but he never let that go to his head. Behind the scenes, he was fiercely private, loyal to his wife, and focused on his work. Fame never changed him. It only pushed him to keep getting better. He wanted to be remembered not just as a star, but as an artist. He had the kind of charisma you can't teach. And it wasn't just about looks. It was the way he moved, the way he connected with the audience, the way he made every character feel personal. When he looked into the camera, it felt like he was talking directly to you. That kind of presence is rare, and Patrick had it from day one. Even as his fame skyrocketed, he never lost touch with his roots. He still rode horses, trained in martial arts, and worked on his ranch like any regular guy. Hollywood may have crowned him king, but he never stopped being Patrick, the Texas boy who loved dancing, the man who believed in hard work, and the romantic who never stopped loving his wife. But the very things that made him so beloved, the charm, the strength, the quiet dignity, would also make his eventual decline even harder to watch. No one wanted to believe someone like Patrick Swayze could suffer. But that's what made his story so heartbreaking. It wasn't just about losing a celebrity. It was about watching a man we all felt connected to face something unimaginable, and still do it with courage. And as the spotlight dimmed and his public appearances grew fewer, fans started to notice something was wrong. But at this stage, Patrick kept the focus on his career, not his condition. No one knew just how soon that light would begin to fade. But behind the scenes, something terrifying was quietly unfolding. It all began with a nagging pain. At first, Patrick Swayze thought it was just indigestion or stress. After all, he was no stranger to pushing through discomfort. He trained his body like a machine for years, through dancing, horseback riding, and action scenes. But this pain wasn't normal. And it wasn't going away. What started as mild symptoms quickly turned into something more alarming: weight loss, fatigue, and constant nausea. Still, Patrick didn't panic. He was a fighter, always had been. But even he knew this was different. After a series of tests, the diagnosis came, and it hit like a wrecking ball. Pancreatic cancer. One of the deadliest forms there is. The kind of diagnosis that comes with quiet rooms and long pauses. Doctors gave him a hard truth. The disease was aggressive, and his chances were slim. But even then, Patrick didn't flinch. He looked his doctor in the eye and said one thing: "I'm going to fight." Most people would crumble under news like that. Patrick got up the next day and went back to work. Literally. He was filming the pilot of his new TV show, The Beast, and refused to let the diagnosis slow him down. He didn't tell the cast and crew at first. He didn't want pity. He didn't want special treatment. He just wanted to work. Behind closed doors, though, he and his wife Lisa were grappling with the unthinkable. She had been his partner in everything for over 3 decades, his anchor in a chaotic world. Now, she had to prepare for the possibility of losing him. But Patrick wouldn't let her fall apart. Even sick, he tried to be her rock. He threw himself into treatment with everything he had: chemo, experimental drugs, even holistic methods. Anything to stay alive. But he wasn't naive. He knew the odds. What kept him going wasn't just the hope of recovery. It was the desire to make every second count. To leave something meaningful behind. His courage during this time was almost unbelievable. He showed up to interviews with a smile, even when he was in pain. He spoke candidly about his diagnosis, not for attention, but to raise awareness. He wanted people to understand what pancreatic cancer was. How brutal, how sudden, how real. The world started to notice. Not just because he was famous, but because he was human. Vulnerable. honest. The same guy who once danced across a stage was now walking through hell and still holding his head high. But behind every brave face was a man in pain. And as the treatments began to take a toll on his body, so did the harsh reality of what lay ahead. Most people would have taken the diagnosis as a sign to step back, to rest, to focus on family and time. But Patrick Swayze wasn't most people. Just months after being told he had one of the most aggressive forms of cancer, he showed up on set, ready to film a gritty crime drama that demanded physical strength, intense focus, and emotional depth. The show was called A Beast, and Patrick was determined to make it count. He wasn't just acting, he was leading the series. The role required long days, difficult scenes, and a performance that would carry the weight of the entire show. He showed up early, stayed late, and didn't complain once. He pushed through pain, nausea, and crushing fatigue. The crew didn't even realize at first that he was undergoing chemotherapy. That's how committed he was to making the work speak louder than the illness. Behind the scenes, though, it was getting harder. His weight dropped, his body weakened, and the side effects of treatment became more severe. There were days when he could barely eat, when he had to fight to stay upright. But when the cameras rolled, none of that showed. He was present, powerful, and completely in character. His co-stars were stunned. Many of them didn't even know how sick he really was until much later. Patrick kept it quiet, not out of pride, but out of respect for the craft. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want to be treated differently. He just wanted to deliver a performance that mattered. And he did. Critics praised the Beast, calling his performance raw, haunting, and intense. He gave everything he had, and you could feel it in every scene. It wasn't just acting anymore. It was a man pouring out his soul while knowing his time was limited. Every line, every gesture carried weight. It was art born from pain. Patrick later admitted that there were moments during filming when he didn't think he'd make it through the day. But he always did. And not once did he ask to stop. He said working gave him purpose. It gave him something to hold on to. When everything else was uncertain, acting was the one thing that made him feel alive. Lisa, his wife, watched it all happen with quiet admiration and heartbreak. She knew what it was costing him, but she also knew he needed this, that it was his way of fighting back, not just against the cancer, but against the idea that it could define him. By the time the series wrapped, everyone around him knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a great performance, but an act of pure willpower. But even after giving so much to his work, Patrick's toughest days were still ahead, and they would test him like never before. Throughout his entire life, Patrick Swayze had one unwavering constant, Lisa Nemi. She wasn't just his wife. She was his best friend, his creative partner, and when things got dark, the only person who truly saw behind the curtain. They met as teenagers when Patrick was just a dancer at his mother's studio, and Lisa was a shy student. What began as young love turned into a bond that lasted over 30 years. And during his final months, that bond became his lifeline. While the world admired Patrick's strength, Lisa saw the struggle up close. She was the one helping him out of bed when his body ached too much to move. She was there during the chemo sessions, the long nights filled with uncertainty, and the moments of quiet fear he would never share publicly. Lisa didn't just love Patrick, she protected him, fought for him, and walked with him every step of the way. When he got sick, she became his nurse, his counselor, and his anchor. She researched every possible treatment, consulted with doctors around the country, and even helped him explore alternative therapies when the standard options stopped working. She never let him feel alone, even on the worst days. And he leaned on her in a way only someone deeply in love could. Patrick once said, "She's my inspiration, my soul, and my partner in crime." That wasn't just romantic talk. Lisa grounded him. Through the fame, the pressure, the chaos of Hollywood, she was the calm in the storm. Now, when everything was slipping away, she became his reason to keep fighting. Not because she demanded it, but because he didn't want to leave her behind. They spent quiet mornings on their ranch, just the two of them and their horses. These moments became sacred. Away from the paparazzi, away from the hospitals, just Patrick and Lisa holding on to the life they had built. They knew the clock was ticking, but they didn't waste a second. Every touch, every smile, every memory they revisited was treasured like gold. Even as his body weakened, their connection only grew stronger. He wrote her love notes, whispered inside jokes, and thanked her constantly for standing by him. He didn't have to. She would have done it 1,000 times over. Because what they had wasn't just love. It was unbreakable loyalty. And when things got harder, when the pain became constant and the end felt near, Lisa stayed right by his side. She held his hand through it all, not because she couldn't bear to let go, but because she wanted to walk with him to the very end. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't just their love story. It was how it all came to a close, and the words Patrick left behind that would echo long after he was gone. By the summer of 2009, it became painfully clear that Patrick Swayze was nearing the end. The cancer had spread beyond control. His body was frail, and even the smallest movements required strength he no longer had. Friends and family noticed the shift. The once vibrant, energetic man who danced with electricity and acted with fire was now quieter, slower, and often in deep thought. Patrick didn't complain, but the silence said more than words ever could. At this point, he had stopped working completely. The beast had ended, and with it, the final professional performance of his life. He had poured every ounce of energy into that show, and now there was nothing left to give. Instead of hospital rooms or treatment centers, he chose to spend his last days at his beloved ranch, surrounded by the sounds of nature, the comfort of home, and the one person who never left his side, Lisa. He became more reflective, often staring out at the horses or walking slowly through the garden when he had the strength. He didn't talk much about what was coming, but his actions revealed a quiet acceptance. It wasn't that he had given up, it was that he had made peace. With his life, with his legacy, and with the fact that not every battle is meant to be won. Lisa stayed close, always nearby, never letting him feel alone. She says that in those last days, Patrick would sometimes squeeze her hand, as if to say, "I'm still here," even when the words failed him. There were no grand declarations or dramatic goodbyes. Just two souls holding on to each other as tightly as they could while time slipped away. Visitors were rare during this period. Patrick didn't want people to see him in that state. He had always been proud, strong, and didn't want pity. But a few close friends were allowed to come by. They say he was gracious, still cracking a soft joke now and then, even while fighting through exhaustion. Always polite, always kind, even as he was fading. Then came the final weekend. Lisa knew it was near. His breathing changed. His body was still. The hospice nurses kept things quiet and calm. There were no machines, no noise. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the occasional soft whisper from Lisa, reminding him how loved he was. And in one of those moments, without warning, Patrick simply let go. No struggle, no fear, just silence. But what broke Lisa most was what he had written down just days earlier. Something private, heartfelt, and utterly devastating. A message meant only for her. And those final words, they would shake anyone who read them and bring tears to the eyes of even the strongest hearts. In the days leading up to his passing, Patrick Swayze knew he didn't have much time left. His body had grown quiet, but his mind was still active. Somewhere inside, he was preparing, thinking about what he would leave behind. Not his films, not his fame, but the words that would outlive him. And for Patrick, there was only one person those words were meant for, Lisa. He didn't want a public letter. He wasn't interested in grand statements or tearful goodbyes broadcast to the world. What mattered to him was personal, intimate, and in a moment of clarity, somewhere between the pain, the stillness, and the knowing, Patrick picked up a pen and wrote something that would forever be etched into Lisa's soul. It wasn't long, just a page, but every word carried the weight of a lifetime. In shaky handwriting, he thanked her. Not for loving him, but for fighting for him, standing by him, and making life worth living even when everything hurt. He called her his angel, his strength, the reason he didn't feel afraid as the end approached. But it was the final sentence that shattered Lisa completely. When you feel the wind brush your cheek or the warmth of the sun hit your skin, know that's me reminding you I'm still with you. I never left. Lisa kept that letter private for a long time. It was hers, and hers alone. But years later, when she finally spoke about it, she could barely get the words out. The emotion still raw. That single note had become her anchor during the darkest days after his death. She said she would read it when the grief felt unbearable, when the ranch felt too quiet, when memories of Patrick would flash through her mind like wildfire. And each time, that letter brought her back. Not because it eased the pain, but because it reminded her of what they had. A love that defied everything, even death. Lisa described how, after Patrick passed, she would sometimes catch herself turning to talk to him, as if he was still in the room. And in some way, he always was. His voice, his laugh, his scent, it lingered in every corner of the home they had built together. But the letter, that was his goodbye, his promise, his way of saying, "Don't be afraid. I'll always be part of you." And to this day, she keeps it in a drawer next to her bed. Faded now, edges worn, ink slightly smudged, but still as powerful as the day he wrote it. But Patrick's story didn't end with his final breath. What happened next, what the public didn't see, would cause shockwaves across Hollywood and even controversy among his closest allies. When Patrick Swayze passed away, the world mourned a beloved star. But behind the headlines and tributes, a very different story was unfolding, one that would turn his final wishes into a battlefield. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It became about control, ownership, and the fight for his legacy. At the center of this storm was Lisa Niemi, Patrick's widow. For years, she had been his rock, his caretaker, and the person who knew him best. But once he was gone, others started circling. Family members, business partners, even former acquaintances, each with their own idea of what Patrick would have wanted. Suddenly, everyone was an expert on his life. Lisa found herself being questioned, doubted, even accused. There were whispers, cruel ones, that she had isolated Patrick, that she had too much power over his estate, that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as perfect between them as they seemed. And though there was no real evidence behind these claims, they caught fire quickly, spreading through gossip circles and the media. Some of Patrick's family members demanded answers about the estate. They wanted access to his assets, input on how his name and image were being used, and even challenged Lisa's decisions about the rights to his films and memorabilia. For Lisa, it felt like betrayal. The same people who had vanished during Patrick's hardest days were now resurfacing, with lawyers. Even fans got caught up in the drama. Social media lit up with debates. Was Lisa protecting Patrick's memory or controlling it? Was she honoring his wishes or rewriting them? The lines blurred, and Lisa, already devastated by loss, was now forced to defend herself in public. And then came the battle over Patrick's ranch, the home where he spent his final years. Lisa made the painful decision to sell it. For her, it was too heavy, too filled with memories. But critics pounced, accusing her of cashing in. They didn't understand that letting go of the physical space didn't mean letting go of him. For Lisa, it was survival. Despite the noise, Lisa pressed on. She kept speaking about Patrick with grace, never responding directly to the accusations. Instead, she let his words and their shared memories speak for themselves. But the ordeal left a scar. It exposed the ugly truth about fame, that even in death, a celebrity's life can become a product. And those closest to them are often the ones left to fight for what's right. Patrick Swayze deserved peace. But instead, his passing ignited a struggle over ownership of his story, his image, and his legacy. And while Lisa never asked to become the keeper of all of it, she became exactly that. But even amid this chaos, one haunting question remained unanswered. What exactly did Patrick know in his final hours that he never told anyone? The clue may lie in a private encounter he had just days before his death. Just days before Patrick Swayze slipped away, something unusual happened, something so private that it didn't come to light until much later. A quiet, almost secretive meeting took place at his ranch, and those who were there have offered only vague hints about what was said. But according to close insiders, this meeting wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about unfinished business. Only a small handful of people were present. Lisa Niemi, of course, never left his side. But also visiting that day was a longtime friend of Patrick's, someone from the early days of his career, an old confidant who had kept his distance for years but suddenly reappeared when the end was near. That visit was not scheduled. It wasn't planned. And no one truly knows what compelled this person to come forward at the last possible moment. What's known is that the conversation they had was emotional, intense, and deeply personal. The two reportedly talked for over an hour, despite Patrick barely being able to speak above a whisper. It was a meeting filled with tears, long pauses, and a kind of urgency that made everyone around the room feel like something critical was being said, something that had been left unsaid for far too long. After that visit, something in Patrick seemed to shift. Lisa said he became more calm, more resigned. He stopped fighting so hard. It was almost as if he had finally made peace with something that had haunted him. Whatever was discussed in that room has never been fully revealed, but those closest to him insist it mattered. A lot. There's speculation. Some say it was about forgiveness. Others believe Patrick confessed something he had carried privately for years. And a few think it was simply a final expression of love and regret, meant to close a chapter that had long remained open. The truth? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. This wasn't just another visit. It was a goodbye with Wade. Even more mysterious was how tight-lipped everyone remained after. No leaks. No press. Not even rumors, until much later when whispers began to circulate about the one conversation that changed everything. Whatever Patrick said in those final hours wasn't meant for the world. It was meant for one person. And perhaps that was his way of taking back control of his story in a world where everything else had been exposed. For a man who spent his career being adored publicly but suffered privately, this final conversation was his moment to speak his truth on his terms. And then, not long after, he closed his eyes for the last time. But even in death, Patrick's presence lingered. And what happened at his funeral would leave everyone stunned. When word of Patrick Swayze's passing became public, the outpouring of grief was immediate. Fans around the world lit candles, shared memories, and rewatched the movies that had made him a legend. But behind the scenes, a very different scene was unfolding, one that caught even those closest to him off guard. His funeral wasn't a Hollywood spectacle. It was private, intimate, and deeply personal. Held on the Swayze family ranch, it was attended by a small circle of friends and loved ones, many of whom had been with him through the quiet final days. But the most shocking moment wasn't in the ceremony. It was in who showed up. Several people no one expected were suddenly there. Some had been seen in Patrick's life for decades. Others had been part of his past that he had carefully kept out of the spotlight. Their presence raised eyebrows. Why now? What did they know that the public didn't? Among them was a former co-star who had shared more than just screen time with Patrick, someone rumored to have once been deeply close to him in ways never confirmed. The two had lost touch for years, but their silent arrival, standing alone at the edge of the crowd, didn't go unnoticed. It was a moment heavy with unspoken emotion. There were also people from his early dance career, figures who knew him long before Dirty Dancing or Ghost. Some whisper that these were individuals who had helped shape the man he became but were quietly written out of his Hollywood narrative. Yet now here they were, paying their final respects in the most personal way. Lisa Nimi gave a tearful tribute. She didn't speak long, but her words struck deep. She talked about his strength, his humor, his relentless hope. But she also acknowledged his pain, without detailing it, saying only that Patrick carried more than most ever knew, and he did it with grace. Those few words were enough to send chills through the crowd. Then came the music. Not the typical somber hymns. Instead, Patrick's favorite song, one he used to play during road trips, began to echo across the ranch. Some wept. Others smiled. And in that strange mix of sorrow and joy, the man behind the legend was finally being honored as he truly was. Complex, emotional, fiercely private, and deeply loved. But the final moment was the most surreal. After the service, a lone letter was read aloud, Patrick's words, written weeks before his death. In it, he thanked those who had stood by him, apologized for the pain he may have caused, and ended with a line that left everyone stunned. If you're hearing this, it means I'm finally free. Don't remember the pain, remember the dance. But the story didn't end at his funeral. What came after, his legacy, and what his wife revealed months later, would leave the world with one final, unforgettable twist. Patrick Swayze's death left a hole in the world of entertainment, but it also sparked a deeper reflection on his impact. As the dust settled after the funeral, a different story began to unfold, one about the lasting mark Patrick left on the people around him, and how his legacy was shaping up to be far more than just the characters he played on screen. Months after his passing, Lisa Nimi began to speak more openly about Patrick's final wishes. Among the things he asked her to do was to preserve his image, not just as the heartthrob from Dirty Dancing, but as the multifaceted artist and person he truly was. He wanted the world to remember his kindness, his resilience, and his unwavering love for his craft. In interviews, Lisa revealed that Patrick had always been wary of being pigeonholed. While he was grateful for the fame and success, he wanted to be remembered for his artistry and the depth of his soul. He He told Lisa more than once that he hoped to be remembered not just for his acting, but for the way he fought his battle with cancer, how he faced it head-on with courage, humor, and a determination that never faltered. As the world celebrated his life, new projects began to emerge, all reflecting the breadth of his career. Documentaries about his time as a dancer, his evolution as an actor, and even his late-stage career, which included both film and television work, started to surface. His films were re-released, and younger generations discovered his incredible versatility as an actor. They saw him not only as the charming romantic lead, but as a man who could tackle gritty, emotional roles with a depth that was both rare and captivating. But it wasn't just about his films. Swayze's influence spread beyond Hollywood. He inspired a new wave of artists, actors, and dancers to pursue their dreams with the same intensity he had. His grace, both on screen and in life, became a standard for those who followed in his footsteps. The charity work Patrick had quietly done over the years also came to light. His involvement in cancer research, his fundraising for victims of domestic violence, and his support for various causes were all part of a larger, unseen side of his character. It was clear that the man who had become a legend on screen had even more profound impact off screen. But perhaps the most powerful legacy of all was the way Patrick Swayze's life taught people to live without fear. His courage in the face of illness, his refusal to let cancer define him, and his determination to keep working until the very end gave people a new perspective on what it meant to truly live. In every interview, every speech, and every story told about him, one word kept coming up: perseverance. And even in his final days, Patrick's words, spoken in whispers, written in letters, and shared in private conversations, continued to echo through those who loved him. His message was clear: live life fully, love without reservation, and never back down from a challenge, no matter how impossible it may seem. As time passed, it became evident that Patrick Swayze's legacy was more than just the films he left behind. It was the way he lived his life, boldly, authentically, and with unwavering courage. And that was the gift he gave to the world, a gift that would live on long after his final breath. But even after all this, there was one last mystery left unsolved, a mystery about his final days that would never be fully understood. And the one person who knew the most about it, Lisa, who carried the weight of his secrets, now and forever.